So hi, this is Trash Talk, and I'm here with Namir. Namir is in Toronto. I'm in Los Angeles. Namir is a filmmaker, illustrator.
Man about town.
I am also a filmmaker, and today we're going to talk about my favorite bad movie, which is Star Trek V.
From a relaxing vacation on Earth.
Greetings, Captain. I do not think you realize the gravity of your situation.
So Star Trek V is a movie that is considered to be the worst Star Trek movie, or one of the worst Star Trek movies. It came out in 1989. It was directed by William Shatner. And some of the more common complaints about the movie are that it's slow, it's boring, the plot doesn't make sense, it's stupid because they're going to look for God, that the special effects are bad, and that the ending is bad. So I guess I will start by acknowledging that I would say that Star Trek V is a great movie with no ending. And when I saw it for the first time when I was 13 in the theater, and I was disappointed with the ending. Despite that, I've watched this movie again and again and again. It's my favorite Star Trek movie. And I think the reason that it's my favorite Star Trek movie is that it's really about a journey, like life's journey, a spirituality, kind of like the meaning of life. And I just love this idea of a Cybok, who's this Vulcan, who instead of going with logic went with emotions as a way to find his own truth. And him meeting people and saying, the only reason you're afraid is because you have this one pain. And if we just get rid of this one pain that you have, your one trauma, basically, then you're capable of anything. And I think up until that point, I never had even thought of that concept. And so it seems like in the movie that he's brainwashing people, but I don't think he is. I think he actually is like taking away their pain and going on this spiritual kind of journey to literally go find God. And I think, where the fault lies in the movie is that it's so ambitious. Like as soon as you're going to go find God, well, you're going to be disappointed. And because I like the movie so much, I've read about the movie and the making of the movie. And they were aware of this problem from the beginning. It wasn't like they made the movie and then they were like, "Oh, whoops! I guess it didn't really work out. It was kind of a letdown when we met God." Mm-hmm. I think they were aware of that problem, but I think that's what I love about the movie is that William Shatner is just kind of like, "No, but I can do it."
But the mountain is climbed because I think the climber wants to hug the mountain. He wants to envelop that mountain within his body. He wants to make love to the mountain. I've dreamed this story. I've helped write the screenplay along with David Lowery and Harv Bennett. David Lowery, of course, being the writer.
He's so ambitious, and the movie is so representative of William Shatner. It kind of like, if you've seen his acting or his like the way he is, his personality, he's just kind of like this large in life. Like his acting is like, it's so large, it's kind of like falling on its face kind of all the time, but he kind of buys into it so much that it's kind of endearing. Like, how can you fault him for like putting his all into something so bad? And I think that's exactly what the movie is. The movie is like, he just went for broke, And that's something actually really rare in the Star Trek movies and in movies, a lot, commercial Hollywood movies. People don't go for broke. They go for like, okay, well, what can we do in this 2 hours and make our money back and, not break the bank and, but he was like, no, we're going to go and meet God. We're going to make this happen, And at the end, the things, that aren't generally known about the movie are the sort of behind the scenes that prevented that work caused some of the major problems of the movie. So I'm not even convinced that the movie itself is flawed so much as the circumstances around the movie made it a challenge. So those circumstances were that it was filmed in the middle during a writer's strike, during a Teamsters strike, and so the Teamsters were retaliating against the production. They blew up a vehicle, so they're dealing with this kind of stuff. They couldn't get ILM to do the visual effects because ILM was already busy on Back to the Future, Indiana Jones, Ghostbusters 2, so they just didn't have, like their A, B, and C team were all busy on these other big movies coming out that summer. So they had no choice and they had to go somewhere else. And even though it had, a bigger budget than some of the other Star Trek movies, it didn't have enough to really overcome the challenges of the visual effects. So the two main areas was the visual effects were actually never finished. What you see in the movie are like partly done visual effects. And the other issue is that there was supposed to be this big ending where with rock monsters coming out of the rocks and the budget kept shrinking and shrinking. They had with all the problems and challenges, the budget they would go over budget, and then the studio wouldn't give them more money. So they went from, we're gonna have 6 rock men to we can't afford 6 to 3 to 2, and eventually they had 1. They had 1 rock dude, and they tried to film with the rock dude. If you go on the DVD, you can see the footage they filmed, and it just didn't work. The rock dude didn't work, so they had to kind of totally make a new ending in post with visual effects. And again, the visual effects weren't that good, and so had everything aligned, maybe that ending would have been better. Maybe it was always destined to fall on its face. But again, going back to what I was saying, I just love I'd rather somebody shooting for something awesome and then coming up short than somebody who just middle of the road it, and you just get a middle of the road kind of movie.
So, okay, let me start by saying I think you make some good arguments, right? Like, it's hard not to be on the side of somebody who shoots for the moon but fails, right? Because they've shot for the moon, and you have to respect that. And I understand the context, the writer's strike, the Teamsters thing, Shatner being Shatner is always an issue no matter what, right? And he doesn't have, I think he didn't really have a lot of experience in the director's chair, which kind of added to the whole thing, right? But for me, okay, let me start with what I liked about it. There are parts of that movie that I really liked, all right? So I liked the dynamic between the 3 of the characters, the only 3 characters that mattered really in that movie, Spock, Kirk, and Bones. I think this was probably the funniest Star Trek movie. Maybe Voyage Home was a little bit funnier, but the parts that are funny were funny, right? It was really enjoyable. There's this one scene where Shatner, where Kirk just came back from rock climbing. They were just called up from shore leave, and he's talking to this admiral, and he's got this T-shirt on, and it says "I love rock climbing," or something like that on the T-shirt throughout the entire conversation. And I was like, that's really funny. So that I like that. And their portrayals are always great. They're dynamic, their banter, really fantastic. And I didn't mind the special effects. I know people complain about the special effects in the movie, but it's from the 80s. It's got a dated look anyway. It didn't really bother me. Because you can have terrible special effects, but if it's in a good movie, then it's okay. The movie, the quality of the movie itself kind of propels things forward, right? And you gloss over the special effects, right? That's why the original Star Trek series works, right? It's not, people aren't this is a terrible show because the special effects are awful, right? Nobody cares about that, right? So I think in some ways the special effects thing is a bit of a straw man argument where you're oh, if only the special effects were better, everybody would love the movie. But I don't think that's true. I think you could have 2020 special effects in that movie, and there would still be problems. And for me, the major problem is the last act, definitely. But I think you could have made the last act work if the rest of the movie justified what happened in the last act, right? Like, for me, thematically, it didn't really make sense. The search for God is fine, but there was nothing that connected that search for God with any of our main characters, right? Like, I didn't care about that. Sybok is not a main character. Sybok is like a sort of antagonist that becomes, part of the gang, right, near the end. But for most of the movie, he's the antagonist, right? So, it would have been better if, and I'm going to go into this sort of like a what if they had done this kind of thing instead to make me care about the movie. I would have liked to have seen some sort of conflict within Kirk, right? Because this is Kirk's movie. Like, Kirk, the rest of the crew is barely in it, right? Like, they don't matter at all, right? Like, this is Kirk's movie. I would have liked it if Kirk had some sort of internal struggle or something that he was dealing with that connected directly with the search for some sort of higher being or God, right? Like even like as cliched as it is, but maybe he's getting older, he's coming to terms with mortality, he's wrestling with the death of his son, so he's asking himself questions about the afterlife, or like, what happens, where did my son go? It was right there, like that whole thing that could have been the driving force of the movie was right there, but they didn't do it. So there was nothing that was propelling you to watch the movie, right? Other than Sybok's whole thing with searching for what is it called? Shangri-La? Shangri-La? Shakari, yeah.
And the reason it's called Shakari, just to interject a little trivia here, is that William Shatner is a big fan of Sean Connery. And he wanted Sean Connery to play Sybok. And the story is that Sean Connery turned it down because he's like, no, I'm playing in the Indiana Jones movie. So I don't know if that's true, that maybe he was just being polite. Or maybe if Indiana Jones wouldn't have happened, Sean Connery would have been in that movie, which would have been fucking awesome. But the point is, he wasn't in the movie, but they retained his name, and that's why that's the name of the planet.
Okay, that doesn't add anything to my enjoyment of the film, not one bit. In fact, it makes me think that Shatner's like, why would he do that? That's crazy. He's like, you're not going to do this movie? Okay, how about we name this fictional planet after you? Are you going to do it then? What about now? What do you think? And I don't think the guy that played Sybok was bad. I thought he was actually really good. I thought he played that role well, and I like that he was like, I'm taking the path of emotions over logic. That stuff is great. Okay, so for me, so it was the thing with Shatner. There was nothing connecting the search for God or search for meaning with their characters at all, right? And that's the same problem that the original Star Trek the motion picture had, right? Which is just like, this movie is just it's just 2 episodes smashed together, right? That's what The Final Frontier felt like. It was just 2 episodes smashed together, right? Like, the movies are always really great because they expand the universe a little bit, right? They show you some of the inner workings of the universe. Like Undiscovered Country was fantastic because they were, it was political intrigue, and this is how like diplomacy actually works in this world. And Wrath of Khan was fantastic because that they're struggling with them becoming older, right? And so it resonates, right? It has this real feeling of being true. And none of that stuff I didn't find that in The Final Frontier. I didn't think there was one thing that was like, yes, this has to be a movie, as opposed to 2 episodes or just a longer episode, right? And so there were a couple of like little things that really bothered me that I just couldn't let go of. So I didn't understand why Sybok could not just take a ship and just go to the center of the galaxy, right? And why couldn't he just get a ship? Like, why did he have to go through how did he get on that planet in the first place? right? One of those people must have had a ship. Like, I don't really get why that planet was so isolated, and you had to go through this entire thing just to get the Enterprise to come to take them, right? It just seemed
I have an answer. Now, I will agree with you on a certain logic point, which is the whole crossing of the barrier thing, which is one of those things where they included it in the novel but not in the script, and really should have been in the movie. And what they had done was that he needed, a starship like power kind of level, but he also had like special calculations to make the shields like be able to penetrate the barrier. And so they didn't get into that. And then so it sort of weakens the whole argument of like why a starship specifically. But I mean that felt clear to me that he specifically had gone to that planet to like, it's like the difference between going on the ocean in a little like fishing ship or boat, and going on the ocean on a ocean cruiser or battleship. It can go further, it can withstand things or whatever. So that part I bought into.
Yeah, and I understand the logic. I just think that it wasn't clear enough, and I don't think that and it's not compelling enough. Like, that's not a compelling enough reason to do that from a filmmaking perspective and a watching a movie perspective.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I think they should have had to have worked a lot harder to cross that barrier, and doing the calculations and that kind of stuff. I think it didn't feel Star Trek-y to me. Like, not Star Trek-y. It didn't feel like intelligent sci-fi to me, right? Like, I think they just could have done a lot more with it. Like, maybe when they get to the barrier, they have a conversation with God, right? Like, God's like, hey, you're here, welcome, and let's have a conversation. Convince me that you should be allowed to come in, right? Like, that kind of stuff. I think that, to me, feels a little bit more like that's what Star Trek would have done. That's what Gene Roddenberry would have done. And by the way, I'm pretty sure that Gene Roddenberry would have looked at this movie and gone, "But trash." I think he may have actually said that.
Yeah, I think I don't think he liked the movie, but I think he didn't like it from a philosophical point of view because he didn't believe in God, and so.
Why is it in the center of the galaxy, and why was this barrier impenetrable? Why didn't they, if they knew it was there, their job is to explore the universe. Why wouldn't they just send a probe or something into the center of the galaxy, past this barrier, and go, oh, there's this planet here. Maybe it's like Eden, Like, it just seemed like such a weird thing that they just threw in. And they're like, oh, by the way, there's this impenetrable dead space in the center of the galaxy. And why the center of the galaxy? Like, make it the center of the universe so it has some resonance. Like, it's such a strange choice. And I didn't get the idea was that the being was imprisoned, right, on this planet. So I feel like that barrier wasn't a barrier. That creature was made out of light or energy, right? So I didn't really understand why it couldn't just leave, right? And I'm sure there was a reason, but my issue was that, and I'm open to like justifiable reasons, but they didn't put any of that stuff in the movie, so I'm forced to just come up with my own, right? Or just think that they didn't think of this stuff, right? So like, one or two of those little things that don't make sense, fine, but there's a whole string of those things that I'm just like, I can't, this is too much. They're not stupid people, right? Like really, Cybok should have been able to just get a ship and go, right? Like, you should have just been able to get a ship and go. And, like, what kind of creature, there's this great scene, the great line at the end where Kirk's like, why does God need a starship, right? And I'm like, why does God need a starship? This thing is a creature of light. It should just be able to leave. It's just energy. Why can't it just go? Why does it need a starship?
Excuse me.
It will carry my power to every corner of creation.
Excuse me, I'd just like to ask a question. What does God need with a starship?
Bring the ship closer.
And then how is it going to control the starship? What is it going to do? Is it just going to become the starship? Right? Is it just going to become like the electricity, the new computer, and then just fly off? And it didn't call the starship. It called the people. And there was a starship on the planet. There's just like the shuttlecraft was on the planet. It could have just taken the shuttlecraft.
It's interesting that you bring all this stuff up because I realized that, the first time I saw the movie, there were a lot of things that were either confusing or I didn't understand or were unsatisfying. And I think, not to compare it to 2001, but I think in 2001, I had a similar experience where, the first couple times watching it where I go, I don't understand what's happening in this movie. I don't understand. It doesn't make sense. And then because I'm stuck in this sort of trying to figure out what the movie is and and kind of trying to figure out the puzzle that I realize that I've done a lot of that with Star Trek V, and I've plugged in a lot of the holes, and so the movie makes sense to me now, and so it makes it a lot more enjoyable. But I remember now having seen it the first time, and I was like it's lame that Sybok is like suddenly his half brother, and we never even heard of him having a brother, and they just kind of like, they just kind of made up this thing.
Sybok also is a son of Sarek.
You mean he's your brother? You made that up.
I did not.
You did too. Sybok couldn't possibly be your brother because I happen to know for a fact you don't have a brother.
Technically, you are correct. I do not have a brother.
Hey, you see?
I have a half-brother.
I guess my main issue was if the barrier was so accessible, if the center of the galaxy was so accessible, then why hadn't they gone there? Because the whole logic of traveling through space with the Federation is that they only explored like 10% of the galaxy or whatever it was. They haven't been everywhere. And then suddenly they're in the middle, which is like, I'm sure pretty far away from where they are. And suddenly they're just there. And then, so that made sense to me in terms of like your argument in terms of, well, if it's there. However, what you said was that you don't buy that they're the first ones, and I don't think they're the first ones. That's the whole point. Is like they keep saying, well, every ship that's tried has failed and basically blown up or never come back. So they're not the first ones to try.
The center of the galaxy can't be reached. No ship has ever gone into the Great Barrier. No probe has ever returned.
Oh, that's interesting. I probably missed that because I fell asleep. Like I just like fell asleep and I woke up and they were on the planet and there's a giant creature in front of them.
And I like the idea of them going to the center of the galaxy. I mean, there's a logic thing that gets resolved in the end, but there's a logic thing that's like, well, if God exists, why would he be in the center of our galaxy? There's so many galaxies. Like you said, why isn't he in the middle of the universe, in the center of the universe? And that was the original concept that William Shatner had written, was that they were going to go look for God in the center of the universe. And then when he started talking to scientists, they said, well, the universe doesn't have a center, so make it the center of the galaxy. And that's how that happened. And then by the end, it turns out it's not the God at all. It's an alien that's been imprisoned there. Then that could happen. Then that would be like the best place to imprison it. And I think the other thing is the solution of it is that, or the answer to your question about, what the thing is and a light being and why does it need a starship and all that stuff, is that essentially it's a penal colony. It was like this really powerful being, and it did bad things, and the other powerful beings said, well, where's only the one place where it can't escape? It's like, the center of the galaxy, we'll put it there, and it'll be stuck there.
So I appreciate you telling me all of this stuff in the context. It really makes the movie feel a little bit more interesting. I just really wish it was part of the movie.
Yeah,
right?
that is the problem with
that would have been nice. Because and that's the thing. Like every time, like when you're watching the movie, I really felt like there were chunks missing. Like tonally, it's all over the place, right? Like, but there's pieces missing, right? Like I was like, this must be like a different edit. Maybe they edited it down, right? Because all of that stuff that you're talking about makes sense, right? Maybe it's probably from the novelization. I don't know, but it should be in the movie, right? Like, I can't judge a movie based on going on the internet and reading like what people are saying about what should have been in there, right? It's just what's in the movie, and it's missing all that stuff. And that's interesting stuff. So I think maybe it's just like Shatner not realizing that, you know, because personally, who cares if scientists have said there's no center to the universe, right? Like, your whole premise is that he's looking for God, right? Put him in the center of the universe. Like, thematically, that kind of makes sense, right? It's the center of all things. And you're like, of course God is going to be in the center of the universe. And actually, it goes, the fact that there is a being in the center of the universe kind of like, you're kind of like, wait a second, if there's a being in the center of the universe, that being has defined what the center is, that being has to be God, right? Like, that's kind of what I would have thought. But the center of the galaxy, just like, this is, and it seems like a little thing, but that's the first thing that came to my mind. It was like, why would God be in the center of this specific galaxy, right? Like, and I think it would have been interesting if they were asking those questions too, right? If Spock was like, logically, if there was a being, why would that being be in the center of our galaxy? You know, like, it's, but they weren't doing that stuff, right? Like, it was like the third of a movie that kind of like is the foundation for the rest of the movie, which is good, doesn't make sense, right? Like, there's pieces that part of that bridge were missing, right? And then, so what happens at the third act is that whole bridge just collapses, right? The whole movie bridge.
Right, and I'll tell you two things that I absolutely 100% love about the movie. And it doesn't matter how flawed the movie is, because it has these things. And what I liked what you were suggesting, where you're saying that that the movie, had it been done differently, that there would have been more at stake for the main characters. So, so then they would have been motivated to find God at the center of the galaxy instead of just being hijacked by this other guy.
Yeah,
it makes the main characters weaker or less motivated. So I agree with that. That's a really good point. And one of the ideas you had was this idea of like that if Captain Kirk is thinking about his mortality, and that is what I think that happens in the movie. And I like that the movie starts with him climbing a mountain, which is this sort of visual metaphor for like, reaching for new heights, internally, he's reaching for, and then he falls off on the attempt. It's almost like a metaphor for the movie. Like, he was trying to climb this mountain with the movie, and then he fell off, and he was rescued by Spock. But because of that, it prompts this whole conversation around the fire. And I think I hadn't really seen another scene before that where the characters just basically stopped and were just like having a conversation. They were on vacation and they were just like talking about life. And I think the characters, and just like we are, we're so preoccupied with our day-to-day like life and work and drama and whatever, that rarely do we stop to go like, well, what is this all about, kind of thing. And there's that moment where they all stop to like start having this conversation, and and McCoy's really angry with Kirk because he fell off the mountain, he could have died and all this stuff, and Kirk just says, I've always known I'm going to die alone.
Maybe it didn't cross that macho mind of yours, but you should have been killed when you fell off that mountain.
It crossed my mind.
And?
And even as I fell, I knew I wouldn't die.
Oh, I thought he was the only one who's immortal.
Oh, no, it isn't that. I knew I wouldn't die because the two of you were with me.
I do not understand.
I've always known I'll die alone.
And it's like such an interesting thing for him to say. It's almost like he had a premonition or a dream, but it really enters this sort of spiritual, mystical kind of place. And unfortunately, it doesn't really lead to anything aside from at the end where he is alone on that planet and he's like, oh shit, I'm gonna die now.
Is that a reference to an episode or something where somebody tells him like, you're gonna die alone, buddy?
No, and that's the thing, is that you think that the way he says it, it makes it sound like that, but it's not. And that's why it's so interesting and mysterious to have it in the movie and just
yeah, and I like that stuff. I mean, I think everything that you pointed out was great. I mean, I like those parts of the movie, right? Yeah. Like, I think that the way they are they're interacting with each other and they're having real conversations, right? Like it's not just conversations that are meant to drive the plot forward. They're conversations that are kind of like they seem to touch on the themes of the movie, but also they're just nice moments where they feel like real characters, right? Like real three-dimensional characters, which I really like. And that to me is the saving grace of the movie, right? It's the only reason why the movie is watchable, right? And and somewhat enjoyable is that they're really well written, and they know those characters inside and out, and they know what they would say and what they wouldn't say, and they know how they interact with each other, and that's fun to see. That's fun to watch, right? But it's not like it. They do that in all the other movies too, right? Like
I don't think at the same level, but yes, they do.
No, not at the same level. You're right.
Yeah, that they
you're right.
Sometimes where they stop and talk and
Yeah, exactly.
But this is a real like full stop kind of like let's meditate kind of level.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's fine. That's interesting, but it doesn't make it for a good all around movie.
No, but it's what made me fall in love with the movie and why I love the movie and I keep watching it. And the other scene that's kind of like that scene is a moment of a real fulfillment moment with Spock, where Sybok is trying to brainwash. He brainwashes McCoy, and you get to see this really poignant, like flashback, basically, of his father dying. Which, you know almost nothing about these characters. They're so kind of one-dimensional in terms of they don't have any backgrounds.
Yeah.
So you have this huge background of McCoy. Like, whoa, that must have been really like. So I think that's what I liked about the movie is that it was really delving into like what made these characters tick, and then he did that with Spock. Again, that he had been basically rejected by his father because of his human heritage, and then there's that one moment where Spock doesn't follow him. He says, "I'm not that outcast boy that you knew all those years ago. I know who I am and."
Sure.
And what my place is. And I thought, wow, like that's a real fulfillment for his character, like because that's been his whole character arc is being like, I'm struggling, and am I human? Am I, and he literally had to die and come back to life and have this whole thing, and then suddenly in this movie, and it's the only time he says it, where he's like, no, I'm totally comfortable with who I am. I've like arrived in my kind of place,
You are my brother, but you do not know me. I am not the outcast boy you left behind those many years ago. Since that time, I have found myself and my place. I know who I am, and I cannot go with you.
It's, what it is? It's kind of the opposite of the other Star Trek movies, right? Where it's really plot driven, right? As opposed to character driven. This is character driven, right? But it really falls flat on the plot. Right, like it really felt like I would have been okay with just watching the three of them kind of walk around the Enterprise, chatting and doing stuff, and having dinner together. That would have been kind of fun to watch, right? But you still need a plot to move the thing forward, right? And that doesn't happen. I think, maybe it was a writer's strike, maybe it was just Shatner, but it really felt like the plot didn't really matter, right? And I watch movies because I want to watch a good story, right? And a good story needs good characters. So it had good characters, but it didn't actually have a great story, right? So that's 50% of the thing kind of gone for me, right?
Right, and I think one of the other problems of the movie is that the antagonist keeps shifting. We think Cybok's the antagonist, but no, he's actually a good guy. And then there's Captain Claw, who's chasing him the whole time, and it's building up to what you think is going to be this amazing battle, but then nothing happens, and he just says, "I apologize." And so the only antagonist of the movie is the god, creature thing, the I don't know what it is, the energy being thing, and it kind of just shows up at the end. So there's no build up to it.
Yeah.
And they just blow it up. They just shoot it.
Just like one button laser, then it's like, it's gone.
Yeah, and everything's solved.
And then everything's solved, yeah.
Yeah, because even Sybok sacrifices himself, and that just distracts it, but it actually doesn't kill it. they blow up Cybok with the thing. It's still alive, and then they shoot it with some Klingon lasers, and then it's fine.
You know, I feel like you can't even talk about the third act. Like you just have to pretend that act doesn't exist. It's like a sickness on that movie. Like you just can't. It can't be there because none of it makes sense.
Well,
right? Like everything up until the barrier is fine, and then that last act, you're just like none of it. It just throws the rest of it off. Right? It just gives it, like Ebola.
Well, the last thing I will say, the one saving grace for that third act is the very last scene on the Enterprise, where it looks like they've made friends with the Klingons. Things are starting to like chill out, and then there's that really awesome moment where, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are looking out the window. They're talking.
Spock.
I was thinking of Sabak. I've lost a brother.
Yes. I lost a brother once.
And if you know Star Trek, oh yeah, his brother died, in season 1 of the original show. And then he switches around. He's like, and I'm lucky I got him back. And then you realize he's talking about Spock. I'm like, oh, brings tears to my eyes each time.
I thought you said men like us don't have families.
I was wrong.
It's so cheesy, but there's something really genuine and earnest about it that makes me kind of totally love it. And then I kind of like forget everything, all the bad things that happen. I'm like, yes, I love you, Star Trek. And then the movie.
But that scene is great because it's kind of what Star Trek is about.
Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream.
Merrily, merrily, merrily,
Row your boat gently down the stream.